What I'd like to show next is just a couple of easy ways of brewing tea if you're not familiar with it. And the first, of course, is what I have in front of me, which is for brewing oolong tea, very high-end, a very small teapot, what's called a gathering pot, what's called a fragrance cup, and then, of course, your drinking cup. And the most important thing to remember when making tea is to have very good water and to ensure everything is warmed before you use it. Nothing can ruin tea more quickly than tea utensils that have not been warmed properly to the right temperatures. Your water needs to be boiled, and it needs to be just a few degrees below boiling, anywhere from almost 75 to 80 Celsius for green teas, to 85 to 90 for oolong teas, to slightly higher if you have a more robust or harder to soak out tea. Once you've warmed your utensils, you pour the correct temperature. We'll warm our utensils here for you. So I'm pouring just hot water into my drinking cup and my fragrance cup. My gathering pot has hot liquid in it. I'm going to add my water to the teapot. And I'm going to wait, depending on the amount of tea and the season and how strong it is, I'm going to wait anywhere between 30 and 60 seconds. Letting the tea soak out, not too much, otherwise it becomes too bitter, not too short of a time, otherwise you don't get the robust spectrum of flavors that's possible. And then once the tea has soaked for its time, I will pour into my gathering pot. And this is very important because very good tea in the right amount in a small pot, it changes flavor literally by the second. And so if I was to pour one person tea, and then the next person tea, and then the third person tea, the third person and the second person would have completely different flavors in their cups, making conversation about the tea very hard. Thus, the gathering pot allows all of the fragrances to go into one gathering pot, and everyone will be drinking the same mix of tea. Please do be sure after you've poured out your tea to remove the lid. Otherwise, the steam will go in and it'll wilt your leaves and give your tea your second soak, a taste that doesn't merit the level of tea that's available. So my fragrance cup is the first place we begin. It's been warmed. I will pour my tea into the fragrance cup. If I had more friends, tea friends, I would pour that for them as well. And we wait. Some people pour out the tea into their cup very quickly. Others will wait longer. I have a personal affinity, and this is just my own personal habit, is I will take my drinking cup, I will turn it over on top, I will place my fingers on the ridge, and I will flip it over. This is something I picked up in Taiwan, where if someone gets up to leave, you would flip their tea to keep it warm. But one of the things I've discovered is tea that's been flipped like this has a much stronger fragrance or nose than it does just directly poured. And for me, what makes the oolong so magical is that fragrance. I am addicted to the fragrance cup over the tea. I'll wait, depending on the temperature of the room. It might be 10 seconds, it might be 30 seconds. But the colder your room, the faster the process is all going to go, because we don't want the tea to cool too much. A good suction, you'll see that I have a suction on my cup. That means I got everything just perfect, but don't be attached to that. But the right temperature, the right cup, the right amount flipped over, the heat from the fragrance cup pulls up, and you will end up with this nice suction. The tea comes out, and the flowers, the fragrance, the depth, the change. As the cup cools, the fragrance grows and then lightens and then comes back. A good fragrance will stop all conversation among your tea friends when you're making tea. The tea itself, what's important is not to drink it too hot. If you don't let it cool just a little bit, then a lot of the fragrances will be hidden. You'll get a very strong, sharp fragrance, which is very nice. But when it's too hot, your taste buds aren't going to pick up the spectrum of flavors. So instead of having one flavor that comes in, a tea that's just the right temperature, warm, not cold, but not too hot, has multi-levels and layers. And when you're buying a connoisseur tea, that's what you're paying for, is a tea that's grown at an altitude, that has a slower absorption of the cold and the sun and the mist and the clouds, that it grows into a more interesting tea, and that people have taken more care in the processing, allowing all of those fragrances to become noticeable to a palate. And what makes an oolong so special, these high-end oolongs, is that each soak, from your very first one, which will be very light, and you'll still be able to taste the plant, the greenness of the tea, to the second soak, where the leaves start to expand in size in your teapot, and take on a tea flavor, to the third pot, which is usually the best of all the soaks of an oolong tea, to your fourth or fifth, however many more soaks you choose to do. But that change in the personality and the fragrance and the taste, each soak is what makes an oolong, a high-level oolong, so special. And then, of course, waiting, because the flavors that come back, what's called the hui wei, or the returning flavors into the mouth, into the cheeks, everything in your mouth is really defined by the quality of tea, but more importantly than the quality of tea is the skill of soaking, of warming your utensils but not using too hot of a water to actually make the tea, or it becomes bitter and loses so many of the flavors. Letting it sit long enough that it's a bit strong or powerful going in, and then the return is very, very sweet. And that's truly what makes the oolongs so special and worth every penny, anytime. But when there's a great year like 2014, then truly a fantastic experience. The next thing I want to demonstrate is how to brew oolong teas that we have, or green teas, you can do the same, in a cup. And there's a couple of ways to go about it. And so I want to show just the most standard or easy ways so that people can start enjoying tea without having to have so many utensils or fragrance cups or all of these things. Because tea comes in a wide variety of price ranges, and the lower end teas can be just as wonderful of an experience when brewed nice and simply with a cup. And the first thing to remember with all is good water and warmed utensils. So I'll make sure that I warm my cup. And on a cold day, I'm not in a hurry. I'll really make sure the cup either sits with the water in it, or I will spin the water, allow it to warm up the porcelain of my cup, my ceramic, really absorb that warmth. And the reason is what we don't want to have happen is we don't want the water temperature to drop quickly when it's soaking the leaves. And so if we have a cold cup and the leaves go in, the hot water goes in and suddenly drops temperature. And that doesn't allow the fragrance of the leaves to open out because everything is going down in temperature. So we want to have a constancy so the leaves can soak out correctly. So my cup nice and warm. I could have also just let it sit for a minute and warmed up, as opposed to moving it around. I then either drink or get rid of my warmed water. And the general rule of thumb when making cup in a tea is we want just enough to cover the bottom the first time around. So we don't want to be able to see the bottom of our cup, but we don't want to see 2 layers of tea in our cup. Once you've standardized on that and decided whether your tea is too strong or too weak, from there you add. But the general rule for cup tea is to make sure the bottom is covered so you can't see the color, but there's not 2 layers of tea. Then, ideally, if you have the time, we want to pour in so there's just an inch or 2 of water. And you don't have to do this, but it's very useful, particularly if your cup was not too warmed, that this allows the tea to go in and start to mix, the fragrances to come out in that water, the cup to change. And then once we have that, we're going to add water a second time. And when we add that water, normally we would wait 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute or 2 or 3, depending on the temperature of the room. The hotter it is in the room, the more you can wait. And then as we add water our second time, we want to pour and raise it up a little bit. And it's not art. It's the fact that as the water gets higher, it has a bigger hit, and it's going to move the tea inside the cup. Then, lid or not lid, to let it soak, have some fragrances come out, allow the chi of the tea or the steam of the tea to hit the lid, and then fall back on top of the leaves. Without doing it the way I just demonstrated, or having a lid that's been warmed, a lot of times your leaves will float to the top, and then when you drink, you'll have a lot of leaves in your mouth. So by warming the cup and then having just the inch or 2 of water, and then adding water after a minute or 2 to stir the leaves get thoroughly wet and they sink to the bottom more quickly. A lid also achieves the same effect, where the leaves float up, the steam hits the top of the lid and pushes back down on the leaves. And that way the leaves become moist on the bottom and the top. They fully absorb the water and are able to evenly sink down to the bottom again. That's just a question of time, practice, and quality of tea, of course. Once we've had our process there, we can let it sit for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on the temperature of the room and what we have going on. And then, of course, we enjoy our tea. And in oolong, particularly the slightly lower elevation oolongs that we carry, do incredibly well with this drinking method. Truly to be appreciated. Another method that you can use is a cup with a strainer, or just using your own strainer. I'm not a big fan of the metal tea balls that are very popular in English and Russian tea drinking, because I'm not a big fan of the metal taste in my teas, but that's personal. So I have a strainer, and this strainer fits inside this cup. So we'll take our tea, and we'll start again. Insert your strainer, if you have a cup with a strainer. Warm the cup with the water, as we've done. Once it's been warmed, add our tea. And here, we can add more tea, if we'd like, or the same amount as before. But here, because we're going to control the amount of time that it soaks, we're going to be able to control the intensity of flavor. And that allows us to put in more and get a more strong, robust flavor without the tea becoming bitter from soaking too long. So once it's in, everything has been warmed, we will pour in our water. Again, we let everything sit, and we may let it sit for a minute or 2 minutes, depending on how much tea we put in, the temperature of the water, and how strong we like our tea. But once that's been done, what's very nice about these particular cups, which we're very big fans of, is that once we let it sit for the appropriate amount of time, we can put our lid down, we can strain our tea, and it has a nice home. Then we enjoy our tea, and then when we're done with our tea, we can put our strainer back in the cup, add another round of hot water, and in that way we might get 2 or 3 soaks because we were able to control the amount of time and have more tea in there to make a more interesting flavor than we would with just tea in the cup. But again, it just depends on the teas. Some do very well in a cup, left to sit a long time. Others need to have the time judged very quickly. The smaller the pot and the higher end tea, the more care we do have to give it. There's many ways of soaking tea, and these are not the only ways. But hopefully this short little video on tea and enjoying how to soak it will help people enjoy the teas they already have, as well as the teas that we now carry for you. Again, you can always visit our website to find out more about tea, tea articles, and how to source what I personally believe to be the best teas